The Las Vegas Raiders were once a powerhouse in the NFL, winning 3 Super Bowls in a span of 10 years, but since 2003, they have only made the playoffs twice. And more recently, they have fired Josh McDaniels as their head coach for their slow start to the season. But in today's video, I'm going to be adding one NFL superstar to the Las Vegas Raiders until they get back on track and win their 4th Super Bowl in franchise history. The 2023 season went terribly, finishing with a 7-10 record, which was last in the AFC West and missing out on a playoff spot once again. Aidan O'Connell was the starter, and he really struggled in his rookie season, throwing for 3,100 yards, 18 touchdowns, and 17 interceptions. But on the plus side, Josh Jacobs somehow finished with a career-high 1,758 rushing yards and 18 touchdowns. Unfortunately, our superstar wide receiver didn't even hit 1,000 receiving yards. Maxx Crosby did finish at the top of the NFL with 23.5 sacks, which was good enough for Defensive Player of the Year. The Buffalo Bills went on to beat the Dallas Cowboys in the Super Bowl, with Josh Allen winning NFL MVP. After every season, we are going to spin this wheel of NFL teams and take one superstar from their roster. The first wheel spin lands on the Los Angeles Rams, and they have 2 really good choices here, including Aaron Donald and Cooper Kupp. This will probably be using Jimmy G or Aidan O'Connell at quarterback. I decided to bring in Aaron Donald to the Las Vegas Raiders, and he will be our starting defensive tackle. I decided to make a QB change, going with Jimmy G over Aidan O'Connell, but we still have Josh Jacobs as our starting running back, and Davante Adams needs to make some plays this season. As for the defense, Aaron Donald is the #1 ranked D tackle in the NFL, and Maxx Crosby will be coming off the edge right beside him. Unfortunately, this defense has plenty of holes in the secondary and the linebacker core. In the opening game of the season, the Raiders offense really struggled early on, but luckily the defense was able to keep them in the game with some big plays by Maxx Crosby. Jimmy G was finally able to get his team into the red zone down 6, but on 4th and goal, he failed to connect with Davante Adams, and the Raiders fall to the Panthers in week 1. The heartbreak continued throughout the season as the team ended up finishing with a 7-10 record. Although the team failed to make the playoffs for the 2nd straight season, Josh Jacobs is now up to a 99 overall, with Aaron Donald and Maxx Crosby also joining the 99 club. Jimmy G ended up having a mediocre season, throwing for 15 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. Josh Jacobs surpassed his record from last year, finishing first in the NFL with 1,800 rushing yards and 18 touchdowns. We seriously need another quarterback on our roster because Davante Adams still can't even hit that 1,000-yard receiving mark. The defense seems to be improving a little, with Crosby putting up 19 sacks, with Tyree Wilson and Aaron Donald putting up some numbers as well. Josh Jacobs ended up finishing 5th in Offensive Player of the Year voting, but Maxx Crosby ended up finishing 2nd right behind Von Miller in Defensive Player of the Year voting. The Minnesota Vikings ended up winning their first ever Super Bowl over Jacksonville, and Patrick Mahomes was your NFL MVP. To make this a little bit more difficult, we'll be alternating between one defensive and one offensive superstar from the wheel spin. And spinning the wheel here is going to be landing on the Cincinnati Bengals. 3 options here in Joe Burrow, Ja'Marr Chase, and T. Higgins, but we all know the Raiders desperately need a quarterback, so let's bring in Joe Burrow to the Las Vegas Raiders, and he'll be our starting quarterback. Although Davante Adams has taken a step back at 32 years old, he now has an elite quarterback to throw him the ball, and the rest of the offense remains untouched, but Josh Jacobs is looking pretty good. As for the defense, Aaron Donald is now 34 years old and has gone down to superstar potential. But hey, at least Maxx Crosby is a 99 overall. After the first 7 games of the season, the Raiders, led by Joe Burrow, are 5-2, right behind the Chargers, who are 6-1. During their Week 8 matchup against a divisional rival, the Raiders were down 1 late in the 4th quarter. Joe Burrow was able to work his team down the field before handing it off to Josh Jacobs, who punches it in from 4 yards out. The Raiders went on to win 31-17, with Joe Burrow throwing for 250 yards and 1 touchdown. They continued to play lights out throughout the rest of the season, finishing at the top of the AFC with a 14-3 record, earning themselves a first-round bye. Joe Burrow finished with 4,300 passing yards, 29 touchdowns, and just 5 interceptions. Josh Jacobs continued his impressive career with another 1,600-yard rushing season, with Davante Adams finally getting back to over 1,000 receiving yards. Both Crosby and Aaron Donald carried the defense with a combined 36 sacks. After finally making it back into the playoffs, we now have a matchup against Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs in the divisional round. The game was 14-10 in favor of the Chiefs heading into the second half, and Mahomes was balling out, throwing an absolute beam to Kadarius Toney, who fights his way into the end zone. And even though Burrow was able to start the comeback, the Raiders ended up falling short to Mahomes and the Chiefs. The Raiders have not won a playoff game since 2003. The Kansas City Chiefs went on to win the Super Bowl over the 49ers, and Patrick Mahomes was your NFL MVP once again. After adding Aaron Donald and Joe Burrow so far, the next wheel spin lands on the Denver Broncos heading into season number 4. We have to take a defensive superstar, and this one was a no-brainer. We can go with shutdown corner Patrick Surtain, or we could go with Justin Simmons. But since Patrick Surtain is a 99 overall, he will be joining the Las Vegas Raiders, and he'll be our starting cornerback. Unfortunately, the linebacker core is really hurting. Joe Burrow continues to lead the offense at a 99 overall, with Josh Jacobs and Adams as his primary targets. Can this be the season where the Raiders finally take that next step and make it to the Super Bowl? And through the midseason, the Raiders are at top of the AFC West with a 5-1 record. The offense is off to a great start, with Burrow already throwing for 16 touchdowns. After simming the rest of the season, the Raiders ended up finishing with a 14-3 record, but it wasn't good enough to beat the Chiefs for a first-round bye. The Raiders offense finished first in the NFL, and that was a big thanks to Joe Burrow, who threw for 4,600 yards, 35 touchdowns, and just 9 interceptions. Davante Adams is finally playing like the superstar he is, finishing first in the NFL with 1,500 receiving yards and 12 touchdowns. The Raiders defense ended up finishing 11th in the NFL, and that was thanks to Patrick Surtain and his 3 interceptions this season. Taking on a 10-7 Indianapolis Colts team in the wildcard game, and somehow the Colts had a lead heading into the 4th quarter. Luckily, our defense came up with a big stop on 3rd down, but the Colts were able to kick a field goal to go up 10. Joe Burrow is doing everything he could using his legs and his arm. The clock continues to tick, and he finally hits Davante Adams, who scores a touchdown to cut the Colts lead to just 3. 3rd down and 2. A first down wins it here, and Jonathan Taylor picks it up. And the Raiders are now eliminated from the playoffs without winning a game once again. The Chiefs end up winning the Super Bowl over the 49ers once again, and Patrick Mahomes wins Super Bowl MVP and NFL MVP. On the plus side, Antonio Pierce won Coach of the Year, and Josh Jacobs won Offensive Player of the Year. After that heartbreaking loss in the wildcard game, the Raiders have added Aaron Donald, Joe Burrow, and Patrick Surtain so far, and heading into season number 5, the wheel spin lands on the Atlanta Falcons, and we can take an offensive superstar from their team. They have 4 really good offensive superstars on their roster, including Bijan Robinson, Kyle Pitts, Chris Lindstrom, and Drake London, but since we already have Jacobs and Davante Adams on our roster, I have to choose between an elite tight end or a solid guard for the offensive line. I elected to bring in Kyle Pitts to give Joe Burrow an extra weapon on offense. The defense remains the same, as we will be relying heavily on Crosby, Surtain, and Aaron Donald this season. Kyle Pitts is looking great in his new uniform, as Joe Burrow quickly finds him in the flat, and he is able to score his first touchdown. The Raiders ended up finishing with a 14-3 record, which was good enough for first in the AFC West. Joe Burrow had another solid season, throwing for 4,300 yards, 42 touchdowns, and just 2 interceptions, while Josh Jacobs went off for just under 1,700 yards and 14 touchdowns. The Raiders take on CJ Stroud and the Texans in the wildcard game, and let's just hope we can finally win a playoff game. Trailing by 7, the Raiders were able to tie the game up thanks to a touchdown run by Josh Jacobs. Nate Hobbs comes up with a sideline interception, and now the Raiders have a chance to put the game away. Daniel Carlson was able to kick a game-winning field goal to finally give the Raiders their first playoff win since 2003. With their newfound confidence, the Raiders went on to absolutely dominate the defending Super Bowl champions 34-23 and are now moving on to the AFC Championship game. They now take on a very good Baltimore Ravens team who finished with a 15-2 regular season record. Max Crosby sacks Lamar Jackson, and then Joe Burrow immediately finds Hunter Renfrow for a big touchdown to open the scoring. And they did not stop there, as Joe Burrow and the offense scored once again, extending the lead to 14. They went on to easily defeat the Ravens in the AFC Championship game and are now heading back to the Super Bowl for the first time since 2002, taking on a 13-4 Carolina Panthers team led by Bryce Young. On the opening drive, Patrick Surtain was able to knock the ball out to hold the Panthers to 4th down. On the Raiders' first possession, they worked down the field before Joe Burrow found Adams in the end zone for a 17-yard touchdown pass. The defense is playing lights out in the first half, with Crosby picking up another sack. The second half was more of the same, and this time Josh Jacobs finds his way into the end zone to extend the lead to 28 with 6 minutes to go. Patrick Surtain picks off Bryce Young, and they went on to win the Super Bowl. It took adding 4 NFL superstars and 5 seasons to finally get the Raiders back on track and win their 4th Super Bowl in franchise history. If you enjoyed this video, YouTube thinks you'll love this one. You should definitely go check that one out.